A couple weeks ago, live on Twitch, I decided to do a little experiment using my years of Spark experience in order to create a build capable of destroying the toughest content PoE 2 has to offer for as little currency spent as possible. I had a goal of 5 Divines to clear T4 Simulacrum, T4 Arbiter, T4 Breach, T4 King of the Mist, and the hardest juiced up maps possible. Over the course of 4 hours, we put this character together, the Spark STORMWEAVER, and I have a 4-hour VOD on my other channel that's going to have timestamps for every piece of gear we buy. And I spend a lot of time going over the most important stats for these pieces of gear just to be most efficient to get the highest amount of damage possible. And we ended up paying around 8 Divines because it just so happens with the market, for a lot of the high value DPS item slots, such as Wand, Focus, Amulet, Rings, Helmet, Body Armor, a lot of the really powerful pieces of gear are just set at a 1 Divine price because people don't want to sell them for lower. Anyways, we ended up paying 8 Divines and we could easily clear all of this content. So I thought I would share the build with you guys today. I originally wanted to splice up the 4-hour stream and just do a video on this channel, but that's just too overwhelming for me. So you're going to have timestamps with all the trade links as well on the main video on my VODs channel. And for this video, I'm just sort of going to do a real quick discussion over the ideas of why I'm doing certain things, so you can get a sort of big picture overview of what you're looking at if you do want to put together something like this yourself. All right, enjoy. So this is the character we ended up with after spending 8 Divines. I've got the price list right here for every single trade I've made. We have 150,000 DPS just standing still in hideout. This is crit-based, non-ES Spark STORMWEAVER. And while we're fighting bosses, we're gonna obviously stack up Sigil of Power. And we're gonna do the offering, and now we're at around 475,000. And for me, that was comfortable to do all the T4 Pinnacle content. It is wildly more than you need to do mapping. So before we go over all of this, which honestly you will see in the main video on my VODs channel, let's just look at the passive tree. It's a very standard passive tree. We have no energy shield. The reason why we're taking off energy shield is that's like 30 points into defense, which could be spent into crit for a ton of damage. And you need to have damage to do the hardest content in the game. We are making use of Electrocute, which is an extremely good defensive layer. So realistically speaking, we shouldn't be getting hit very much anyways. This build still feels very tanky. I'm not dying in maps. I'm not dying in Simulacrum. T4 Arbiter, this can one-phase him, although the problem with that is you always have to do one mechanic no matter what, because they sort of nerf the Arbiter fight. So that is skill-based still. If you haven't done Arbiter and you're looking to do it, I would practice on a T1 Arbiter because you get lots of portals. If you do a T4, it's single portal. You have to do the mechanic. But at least with this build, it is still best case scenario because you are only going to have to do one mechanic probably. Okay, so for this tree, we have 2 different weapon sets because I like to have a really big AoE for Sigil of Power. So when our staff is out, we grab these AoE nodes and these AoE nodes. And when we have the wand out, we're casting Spark. It specs this as well as this. For jewels, you can find this in the timestamps on the VOD. Realistically speaking, what you need to have is you really want to have at least one recover 2% of mana on kill. And I opted for high roll of Pierce on 2 different jewels. The way Pierce interacts is, well, we're actually on the bossing setup right here. If you were mapping, you'd grab Branching Bolts and you'd unspec either this mana sustain or some of the damage right here. And for mapping, if you have, let's say, around 40 to 50% pierce, most of your projectiles are just going to immediately chain into the monsters you're shooting. But, you know, whatever percentage of pierce you have is going to go through that pack. It's still going to damage them once, but it's not going to chain in it. The thing is, Spark doesn't shotgun anyway, so there's no advantage of having like 20 projectiles hit one pack. So we want part of the projectiles to pass through, and then they're going to hit another pack of monsters somewhere off screen and destroy that before you even see it. And you're always going to pierce before you chain, which is why you want to have less than one pierce. I have roughly 35% pierce here, and that feels pretty good. So that's the logic there behind the jewels. Other than that, I was trying to get as much damage as possible in these jewels. So for here, got some magnitude of shock, cast speed, critical spell damage. This, just a bunch of damage. The way I was searching for budget jewels was through Path of Building. So Path of Building has this tool, trade for these items. You have to have your hit damage accurate though, which means your configuration needs to be accurate. So you can grab my config in the video description of the main video. And so the way this works, hit DPS. This is the overall damage of this build. So we go to trade for these items. We just choose any jewel socket. And you're going to have to sort by hit damage, which means you go to adjust weights. Hit damage needs to be 1. Everything else should be 0. By default, this is not the case. By default, it's full damage is 1. So you need to change this yourself. And now when you do execute, it's going to give you a trade link, which we can pull up. And we're going to have like a sum, and you just search by sum. Obviously, like the best jewel is probably going to be very expensive. So the way I do it is I just set like a limit of maybe I want to pay 20 exalted orbs. And this is like technically on paper the best damage for my budget. But you have to keep in mind some things are not going to show up because they're not going to be calculated in that damage. For example, magnitude of shock, which is one of the best rolls, isn't. Pierce obviously isn't going to. And recover mana on kill is not going to show up. But we can account for this because when you go into the weighted sum, it's going to have, like, this is just basically saying, like, this is the best stat, this is second best, lower, 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 lower. And then you can just manually add mana on kill and give it like a really high rating. I don't know. That's how you would solve for that. Or you could also just do count and look for like a magnitude of shock or pierce or mana on kill, count of 1. And then you're going to get a lot of damage and also one of these really important things that doesn't show up. So that's how you'll do that. And obviously, if you want to see exactly how I'm making those trade searches, just watch the video in the description, like the full 4 hours. Maybe watch it at 2 times speed. Just use the bookmarks in there. Now for the rest of the short video, I think we'll just do a brief rundown of how I was spending my currency. So it only costs 50 exalted orbs to get a Spark 5 link. The reason for this is because this is only level 20. But that's a good trade-off if we're going for a budget. So the Spark 5 link is supported by Arcane Tempo, Acceleration, Inspiration, Considered Casting, Rising Tempest. All the other gems were basically free because, as you can see, they're just a 3 link, which costs nothing. So Archmage, you can get level 19 Archmage off the ground. It's very cheap. It's basically free. And I just corrupted them until I got +1 corruption. So that raises it to level 20, but you need to hit level 21 to get the damage breakpoint. So we are supporting it with Lightning Mastery support. And that's how we're hitting the level 21 Archmage for super cheap. Do keep in mind, quality is very important on Archmage. So there was a cost to this, which was all the GCPs, because you need to GCP before you corrupt. Next up, Soul Offering, supported by Danse Macabre, Ablation, and Persistence. And this is working with Skeletal Cleric. And if you watch any of my previous build guides, I go over how you can do this on your weapon swap, because we are using just the default 100 spirit. So Archmage is using all of our spirit. And then when we weapon swap, I'll just do it. 40 spirit is on the cleric and 40 spirit is on the blink. And that's how we're getting all of this for so cheap. Next up, Orb of Storms, Lightning Exposure, Strip Away, Font of Mana. And this will help in boss fights, because keep in mind, we are using our mana to cast our spell, but our mana is also our only defensive layer. This is our health, because we only have 1 life. There's no energy shield. So the Font of Mana gives us a little bit more mana regen in these boss fights, where we can't make use of our mana on kill jewel in order to top us up. Conductivity, Heightened Curse, Focus Cursed, Hexbloom. You could swap Hexbloom for Cursed Ground if you want. They're both good options. Flame Wall has Fire Mastery, Spell Cascade, Fortress, and Blink is supported by Ingenuity. Okay. So those are the skill gems. We spent 50x on that. And then I opted to get the cheapest pieces of gear, which are belt, boot, and helmet. So for belt, I was looking for, I believe, just as much resistance as I could get. Obviously, energy shield and mana will add to our defense, because those are going to be our mana pool. Energy shield is being converted into mana as well. And that's also scaling our damage through Archmage. So we picked these up for 50 Exalted Orbs. Again, trade links for all this stuff are going to be in the main VOD video. The belt. For a cheap belt, you're really just looking for resistance and a high mana roll. So that's what we did. This only cost 19 Exalted Orbs. And for the helmet's actually a really strong DPS slot, because you can get a lot of mana from it. We're getting 200 energy shield, which is 200 mana. This also has a roll of 180 mana, so that's 400. And the 36 intelligence is equal to 70 mana. So this is 470 mana. It's going to give us a lot of survivability and a lot of damage. There's a little bit of resistance on here as well. Okay, so this was the cheapest stuff to buy. And actually, I do have timestamps here. So if you want to see on the VOD, I mean, it should be hopefully timestamped on the VOD, but also you can just reference, this is like how long into the stream do I talk in very much more depth than I am right now on exactly what kind of stats I'm looking for, how we make the trade link, the ideas behind that. Okay, next up, stuff gets a little more expensive because these give us a lot of power. So the body armor, this has 1,000 energy shield, which is 1,000 mana. And yeah, it's an expert Keth raiment, which is great because it gives us that huge amount of mana regeneration rate. So that's what I was looking for here. Really high energy shield on an expert Keth raiment. And it has some intelligence for, again, some more mana. Couldn't really get much else on here though. A tiny bit of cold res, but really we were just looking for as much energy shield as possible for one divine. Next up, the amulet. So this was another one divine purchase. +3 to level of all spell skills. So that's buffing Flame Wall. It's also buffing Spark, although realistically, Spark is the main thing you want to be buffing here. We got some resistance. It's pretty hard to cap resistance when you have a shoestring budget, so that's obviously great. Cast speed is a lot of damage. We have mana. And I'm allocating mental toughness. I believe that's very cheap. That's why I was doing it. Where is mental toughness? Yeah, this was just super cheap. it was giving me some mana regen and reduced mana cost when you're not on low mana. Low mana, I believe, is 30%. And yeah, when you don't have energy shield and you don't have the expensive flask that instantly tops up your mana pool, you are going to want to make it so that you can cast permanently and you don't really lose mana, or else these boss fights are going to be kind of scary because you're going to take a hit and you're going to have to stop casting in order to heal, and it's going to heal you a lot slower if you don't solve that. So that was what we were doing there. And I believe I made a trade search for that using the same principles for the trade search for the jewels. Okay, next up, the rings. For rings, obviously you want a really high amount of flat mana for two reasons. Obviously, like, you want all this mana because mana is our defense and also mana is our damage through Archmage, but we don't have any energy shield, so using mana as a form of defense is extremely important. So yeah, this is really high mana regen. Both of those are very defensive. And that's it. I think this was one divine. I guess there was some resistance on here as well. The other ring, it has cast speed as well, but it doesn't have resistance. I believe I just needed to fix the resistances, which is why I don't have cast speed on here, because that would just be too expensive. For the gloves, Katako's it does have a penalty to cast speed, so it is lowering your damage. But the electrocution is so important, especially when you're doing this glass cannon mana only build. So you will get stunned every single hit when you're at 1 life, because stun threshold is based on how much life or how much energy shield you have, and we don't have either of those. You can use a stun charm to some degree, but realistically, you just don't want to be getting hit very often, because if you do get hit, you will be stunned. Thankfully, with Spark, your sparks are going to be flying around all the time, so even if your character does get stunned, your damage does not stop because you have a screen full of sparks anyways. So you still get stunned playing this. I'm not going to say this is stun immune, but the fact that we're electrocuting enemies almost instantly means we are almost never getting hit, so the stun does not become too much of an issue here. Okay, we already talked about the jewels earlier, but as you can see, I paid between 20x and 2x for all of my jewels. They're all very cheap. Oh, it looks like actually for the Archmage +1 corruption, I ended up paying 85x for that. I didn't corrupt them myself. Or maybe I did, and that was just how much it cost with all of the GCPs. I don't remember. Over here, I'm listing a bunch of different anoints you could do. So Frazzled is a really good damage anoint. It only costs 12x. We obviously ended up going with Mental Toughness because I had mana issues, but if you somehow managed to get a little bit more mana regen, you could go for this instead. And then here's some more jewels. This build uses so many jewels. I guess we bought 8 jewels total. And yeah, I guess I've covered everything, right? One of these rings was actually pretty cheap, 20x. The Chiming Staff, you can honestly just drop one of these, right? It just needs to have Sigil of Power, preferably a high level. This is level 18. Doesn't really matter too much, just get what you can. And I bought a Stun Charm for 3x. So that's the rundown here. That's going to wrap things up. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you want some more in-depth info, check out the pinned comment in the video description. You're going to get the VOD with links and POB. I should be live on Twitch after this goes up, streaming some of the build, and then I'll probably move on to continue my Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 run that I started yesterday. And on Friday, I believe I will be playing a DSLE's Hardcore League in Path of Exile 1. We'll be playing Archmage. That should be fun, so you can look out for that in the near future. All right, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.
fire of the mother soul.
Where is it? A minute.
Your affliction upon her will soon be erased.
This 5? 6? No! 7? Where's the last one? I don't even... That was it.
Tainted morality, coursing through time to find you.
Okay, thank God.
The mother soul
We did it.
must
Oh, we even got a thing. Nice.
Khan favors me.
Huge. You can't one-shot this as far as I understand. You always have to do one phase.
This power serves a new master.
Okay, that was level 4. We did it. Can we do it twice? I kind of want to try it more than once. Rip wire ballista. I don't even know what that shit is. Rip.